Hey guys, so in this video we're going to go over a new helmet that's being released in last Epoch 1.1. It's going to be the Seed helmet. I don't really think anyone can pronounce this actual name, so I think everyone's just going to be calling it the Seed helmet. So basically, this helmet is pretty insane, very overpowered, and probably maybe even one of the strongest unique items that's been released in the game almost. This thing is pretty much like on par with things like Exsanguinous, enabling low life builds. Pretty insane helmet. So why is this helmet so good? First of all, well, there's two reasons. First reason is the damage dealt to mana before health. This used to be sorcerer or mage exclusive, this affix. You couldn't get it on any other class, but now with this helmet you can actually do mana stacking and have some damage reduction, albeit, you know, not as much as a sorcerer. Sorcerer can get all the way up to 100% damage dealt to mana for health, but you know, you can get 28%, so you know, 28% damage reduction from using this helmet. So other classes that can stack mana, like mainly thinking of like Sentinel, you know, he has some mana stacking stuff that you can do. This helmet might be very nice for that. Okay, so so that's pretty good, right? Enabling mana stacking on other ascendancies or classes or whatever. But the main winner of the helmet is right below over here, and it says up to 56% of endurance applies to all damage dealt to mana. So I actually originally just missed this line completely. Didn't even know what it did at a first glance, but basically this reduces the damage that your mana takes. Right, so when you have the damage dealt to mana for health, you take some damage to your health, that damage gets shifted over to your mana. And it used to, so it's actually kind of funny. So when they first had the mana stacking in the beta, this was active already. Like, it was kind of like an unintended interaction where your endurance applied to the damage that was drained by your mana. And when that was the case, mana stacking was pretty insane. There were some pretty crazy builds done with mana stacking because you could easily sustain the amount of mana drained because your endurance actually reduced the amount of damage that your mana took. Apparently that was an unintended interaction, and they fixed it basically by removing that interaction. So endurance now did nothing to the mana drain, so you just took tons of damage to your mana. And it was pretty much a lot of the builds that did mana stacking just kind of died out because they couldn't generate enough mana to actually make the build playable. But now with this helmet, we're back to, kind of went full circle, and we're now back to endurance applying to the damage dealt to mana. So I mean, not all of your endurance, right? So maybe it's like, what, let's just say 30% of your endurance, so 30% damage reduction on the mana drained part. So even that is pretty insane. It's going to allow you to take a lot more damage to your mana and not really drain your whole mana pool in a couple of seconds. Right, so what does this mean in real life? Well, it means, like, I guess, if you're using this helmet on a different build, like you're using on a paladin, then you're going to have an easier time sustaining your mana, generating your mana, and it's going to work out pretty nicely. And on sorcerer or rune master, or a mage build that wants to use this damage taken from mana for health, well, now it's going to be a lot easier to sustain the mana drain. So you won't really have to build that much into mana sustain as before, or you can actually go and push all the way up to like 70, 80, maybe even 90% damage dealt to mana for health, and actually sustain your mana pretty nicely because of this damage reduction that your mana gets. Alright, so that's sort of the rant about the helmet. A pretty insane helmet, really cool, and pretty excited to play with this, get my hands on it. It seems like it is actually, sort of high for a high level for legendary potential, and it is going to be a little bit hard to get 2 LP, 3 LP, but if you're a Merchant's Guild, you probably will be able to find one, which is going to be pretty insane. Okay, so 1.1, I'm pretty much going to be doing a Fragmented Enigma build yet again, right? Basically my build from last league, but we're converting it over to the new league. There's a couple of changes we're doing, so let's get into that real quick. First of all, we do have to talk about some of the skills. There has been some nerfs and buffs, I guess. So kind of interesting. Main thing is going to be Frost Claw. So now Frost Claw is going to be costing 80% of the mana every time we proc it. It used to be 0 mana, so now we do actually have to build into mana sustain for Frost Claw. So the way we're doing this is basically just taking Gift of Winter, all 3 points, Frozen Rain, and then possibly going into this, the mana efficiency node here. And then we're also going to be getting these mana efficiency idols. Thankfully it's a prefix, so we can still get the mana and armor suffix, which is quite nice. So it actually works out pretty nicely, and probably that's enough mana reduction. But so basically it's like 30% chance to proc Frostclaw, you know, right? But then now there is a passive over here in Spellblade that gives you another 20% chance to cast Frostclaw. So now we're at 50% chance to cast Frostclaw on melee hit, which means a lot more Frostclaw procs than before, which means more mana, spending more mana on this. So I'm not really sure how much mana I'm actually going to be spending. I did some tests in game, and the mana for my Dragor's Claw, basically without these nodes it was 8 mana, and with these, with one of these nodes it goes down to 7. I wasn't able to test with full 3 points, but that's sort of the deal, how much mana was costing. So 7 mana per cast, not that bad, but might be problematic. So if it is costing too much mana, I think what I might do is, you know, there's a couple of things we could do. I could probably just drop this Volley of Glass node, although that's not ideal. If I drop this, it would go down to being 0 mana. Or what we could do is basically, instead of reducing Frostclaw's mana cost, we could also reduce Lightning Blast mana cost by just making it not double hit, because we're going to be proccing a lot more of these Lightning Blasts anyways, because with the Dragor's Claw, right, it's when you crit on cast with Frostclaw, and we're casting a lot more Frostclaws, so we're probably going to be getting a lot more Lightning Blast procs anyways. So that's something we could do here, is just sort of get rid of some of these additional chains, and then our Lightning Blast is only going to be 3 mana instead of 9. So that might kind of work out. We'll see what happens. I think that kind of stuff you kind of have to play around with and see what it feels like in game to actually get a good feel on it. But that's sort of my main concern, is the mana cost for proccing all of these spells. But you know, it should be, or you know, it should be a way to set it up comfortably, right? Okay, so aside from that, there's a couple of other items we're using. So obviously we're going to be using the new helmet. This build is going to be running about 78% damage dealt to mana for health, and I know it says 68% here in the planner, but the planner doesn't take into account one of the new passives, Mana Bulwark, which gives us another 10% damage dealt to mana for health. So we're actually at 78% over here. Now, can go higher, quite a lot higher, but I don't really think it's actually maybe needed. Maybe it is. We'll have to see basically how much mana we're draining, how the mana sustain is. If the mana sustain is good, we can bump up this number a bit more. If it's not good, we can actually just remove some nodes here and put them somewhere else. Right, so one other cool thing about this helmet is, if you notice, we can actually still build Ward. Right, so you might be thinking, well, you know, Ward on a build that's focused on endurance threshold isn't really good, because endurance doesn't apply to your Ward. So why, you know, that's kind of counterintuitive, you might think, but Ward actually is quite nice to have on these builds for a certain reason. So basically the damage dealt to mana for health, it says health, right? So it doesn't do, you know, that doesn't apply to Ward, which is actually kind of a good thing in a way, because the way we want to use Ward on a build like this is you want it to be a sort of buffer for when you are low on mana, basically, right? So if you're low on mana but you have Ward, the damage you take is going to be taken from the Ward, and then basically won't drain any mana, because Ward doesn't do that. So we basically can use Ward like an extra layer of mana in a way, kind of pseudo mana. And so there's one item I was thinking of using. So it's the Font of the Erased. I'm not really sure how good this item is going to be, guys. It's just kind of like theory crafting. But in theory, we get a lot of ward gained on hit per missing mana if our current ward is lower than your missing health. So basically we're going to be at 0 ward, maybe, possibly. Most of the time, say we get a big hit and we go down to 500 health, we also have about only 800 mana, or 500 mana, just make it easier to say. And then basically at that point, this ring will kick in and we'll be getting a lot of ward gained on hit because it's based on, you know, per 10 missing mana. And then we're going to get a big chunk of ward. And while we have this ward, then our mana can recover while the ward is taking care of our damage, and then it'll just kind of repeat, right? So you take a lot of damage, you get a lot of ward, and then you have time to recover your mana, or a little bit more time. So that's kind of a way I wanted to play it, is whenever I do take a big hit, then you can just use ward as a sort of buffer to help you recover, which is quite nice. Okay, so one of the other items we're using is going to be Fingers of the Phantom Mire. This is a new pair of gloves. This pair of gloves is kind of cool because, first of all, legendary potential level 6, right? So what does this mean? It means 4 LP, 3 LP. They're going to be very, very doable with these gloves because, you know, it's going to be easy to get legendary potential on this item. Right, so this one, very cool. Basically just 15% more damage because, you know, 15% more damage to feared enemies. Evade is replaced by Terrify, so we're not going to be evading, but we can use our evade button as a damage boost. It also says you have swiftness. Now swiftness is kind of interesting. It is basically just a movement speed buff based on your character level. Now I don't really know how much movement speed it is. It says up to 100% on this DB site, so I'm not really sure if it's correct, but basically getting movement speed, more damage, attack speed, immune to slow, chance to slow is basically going to be pretty insane for pretty much any build. So I do want to definitely try these out. Aside from that, I think pretty much everything is the same. A lot of the skills we already went over how we're changing them. Not really that many other changes anywhere else. So I think we'll end the video here. I will be making build diary updates for the build, and I have sort of updated the starter build that I'll try to be starting off on, you know, while I'm leveling up and getting the items for the mana stacking build. This is what I'll be playing. I'll have links for these in the description. Go check out. And like I did last league, I'll do some update videos on the build so you can see how it's progressing and that kind of stuff. All right, so that'll be it for this video, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.